data privacy is being transformed as a profession. The International Association of Privacy Professionals, which has about 85,000 individuals as members, is no longer even referring themselves to an association of privacy professionals. They're just called simply IAP. They discovered what I think the line partners like myself have known all of these years, that data is not just a privacy issue or a legal issue. It's a multidisciplinary complex issue that requires cybersecurity professionals alongside with it.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of The Future of Data Security. Today I'm speaking with Sylvia Klasovec Kingsmill, Senior Fellow with the Future of Privacy Forum and founder of Trusteva. Sylvia, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here, so thank you.
What initially drew you to data privacy and data risk management, and how has your career evolved to bring you to your current position?
Well, to be super honest with you, it was quite serendipitous. I didn't follow the traditional trajectory of going to law school, getting called to the bar, and practicing law. I did get called to the bar of Ontario. However, I realized very soon enough in my career that I didn't want to read case law all day. I'd rather read summaries of it, and I didn't want to be a litigator. So I ended up at the Ministry of Health for 6 months, and I bumped into a lady by the name of Dr. Anne Kabukian, and she gave a brilliant presentation at a privacy conference, which spoke to me. And a week later, I ended up in her office and I got the job. So my privacy career really began with the regulator. And then I ended up being poached by a boutique consultancy firm, which got bought by Deloitte. And I think that was sort of the beginning of my career in Big Four consulting. From Deloitte, I ended up at KPMG International, where I headed up the global cyber privacy solutions practice. And I never looked back, really. So today, I'm no longer in Big Four consulting. I'm now a senior fellow at the Future of Privacy Forum, which is not about selling privacy services, really. It's more about selling the idea and philosophy of data best practices. It's about public discourse. It's about engaging the public to ensure that we have privacy-enhancing technologies, that we really practice the philosophy of privacy by design and security by default. And really, it's about putting Canada on the map. Canada is a special jurisdiction. We've always had great laws, but it's time to modernize our laws. So I'll be heading up the Canadian footprint as part of the Future of Privacy Forum to ensure that we enable ethical and responsible use of data, really.
People always get this wrong and get confused between data privacy and data security. Can you explain the differences and how they ultimately interrelate?
I love this question because for the 15 years that I've been in Big Four consulting, privacy always sat within the cybersecurity practice. They are not mutually exclusive disciplines. They're very complementary, but they're different. So if you had a Venn diagram in front of you, to the left would be privacy, to the right would be security, and in the middle you have sort of like what's the same. I would say privacy is about the protection of the rights and freedoms of individuals, right? It's about giving individual users control back because it's their data that everyone's leveraging. And if you look at data privacy laws and how privacy is regulated, it's really a principled approach around the collection, use, disclosure, retention, destruction of data. And that's all predicated on consent, right? And transparency and accountability. And so that's kind of like the softer side of the discipline. So that's the left. And then you have security. Security is about protecting the data from being infiltrated, right? It's about intrusion detection. It's about safeguarding using technical means like encryption and all the great stuff cybersecurity guys do. So really, you can't have one without the other. I think they complement each other. And really, it's not an and/or proposition. You need both. So I would say that cybersecurity and privacy are on an equal footing, because then there's that little, that the delta of what's the same. Well, the safeguards are the same. If you look at the law, it requires organizations to put into place safeguards. So that's the data protection angle of it. But the cybersecurity professional wouldn't worry about transparency, notice, consent, right? But the privacy practitioner would. So there's a common ground around safeguarding, access control, who has access to what, where, how, when, and why, which is something that the privacy professional would also worry about. But again, my point really here is that data is the common denominator to all of this, right? It needs to be protected because it's the most significant strategic asset that any company, right, has. And so they need to be coming together at it rather than pivoting budgets against each other. It's really a multidisciplinary approach, I would say, to the data problem because it is complex. So I would say they're not mutually exclusive. They're very complementary to one another.
Now that we've clearly defined the two, and I agree with you, there's obviously a common overlap, which is the asset itself, the data. What do you see as the biggest data privacy challenges that are facing businesses and organizations today?
Navigating the ever evolving, complex privacy regulatory landscape. There are so many laws out there across the different sectors, across the different jurisdictions. And in some, there is none. Like in Canada, we have some. It just needs to be modernized. It's like a limbo with C-27, a federal privacy bill. There's no shortage of confusion, I would say. And practitioners, at the end of the day, companies, especially small ones, are left to their own devices, figuring out when to do what. So if you are a small startup and you want to go big and have a global footprint, the complexity is, how do you launch a product or service offering while understanding all the different nuances? So I think that is going to be a huge, huge challenge, especially for the smaller guys who don't necessarily have all the biggest budgets to solve for the compliance bridge, if you will. And then you put AI into the mix, right? There's privacy laws. Now there's cybersecurity legislation. There are standards. There's regulatory guidance. I think it's going to be even more complex. And regulators don't even have the same approach to AI, to interpreting AI regulation. So we're operating in a big gray zone right now. And if you are a practitioner, a data practitioner that enjoys being comfortable with being uncomfortable, then this is the place to be at. There's a lot of change and a lot of limbo. And so I would say, and you might be thinking, well, Sylvia, that's great complexity. What do you do about it? Right? What are these companies going to do about this complexity? I would say, you know what? Harmonize. Take a risk-based approach to compliance and figure out what the biggest risk is going to be to your organization, and then leverage that budget towards that so you can have a due diligence defense if the regulator ever knocks on your door to ask you for, hey, you have a breach. What are you doing about it? So I would say the harmonization exercise is critical. And then you're left with a delta of compliance obligations that then you can, decide how to approach. But I would say there's an order of priority that companies can take. And it's all about having a due diligence defense well documented so that, if there is a breach, God forbid, knock on wood, you have something to present to the regulator. Because I've been on that side of the equation. I've done a lot of remediation work with regulators. And I would say, apart from just doing the compliance stuff, because that's just a tick the box, I think it's a good idea to look at the trajectory, to look at regulatory guidance. What are they thinking? There's the Global Privacy Enforcement Network. Data protection commissioners talk to one another. The FTC and the OPC here in Canada, the OPC, the Office of Privacy Commissioner, they're talking to one another. And so that whole catch me if you can attitude back in the day where, there's a jurisdiction that doesn't have a law or pronounce it, we're just going to hide out over there and ship all of our data to that server. That's not going to work anymore because harmonization is a strategically important priority for all the regulators, especially the European Data Protection Board.
You mentioned that consent is a core tenet of data privacy. I'm curious when it comes to AI and this whole Pandora's box of obviously consent can be given, but also retracted. What are some of the challenges with these AI models that are going to be trained with data subjects, data, and other issues? Can you give us some insight on that topic?
So if you look at the traditional principles of privacy, right? I think that AI is not only transforming, but challenging these principles. Because if you look at machine learning algorithms, they require extensive data sets, right? And that's all about scraping the internet. Scraping the internet isn't new, right? That's an exercise that everyone's been doing for quite a long time. I just think that Gen AI has added a layer of complexity to it. Web scraping, I would say, contravenes the principle of consent because you can't really get consent from all of your constituents. And if you do, chances are they're going to opt out. And if they do opt out, if you think about accuracy and what the training data sets need, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have the right input, you may get the incorrect output. So knowing what I know about AI, it hallucinates, right? And accuracy is very important. So data scraping really ignores all of the traditional privacy principles, right? Data is just taken by third parties, right? uh, the scrapers without notice, without consent, without vetting, without the safeguards. And if you don't do that, right, do you have lawful processing under the GDPR? Probably not. Do you have the right consent to be able to get the data, or can you rely on legitimate interest, which is another avenue for consent under the GDPR? And I would say what's even complicating things more is the data protection authorities in Europe can't even align, right? The Dutch say data scraping is always illegal. And you have the French saying, well, you can probably interpret legitimate interest as one of the 6 avenues of lawful processing to include, AI and data scraping. And so they have a whole committee that's struck down to talk about this problem. So I think there's going to be some sort of a reconciliation, if you will, or an interpretation that needs to be a bit flexible so that AI can thrive. Otherwise, if you look at AI models and the big players, it's hard to imagine that the STC, for example, in the USA, who has a remedy of model disgorgement, right? If you illegally obtain the data and you use a model without consent and all the right privacy parameters, we have the authority to dismantle that AI model. Like, who's going to challenge a hugely popular algorithm like OpenAI worth multi-billions of dollars, right? And you have the Italians who started the whole investigation against OpenAI a year ago, and we still haven't seen the outcome of that, right? I wouldn't want to be in the position of regulators to do that because I think everybody believes in the promise of AI, right? But we also understand the risks associated with it. So I think the principles for privacy, which are codified in law, is a great foundation and a starting point. But I think we need to adopt a flexible mindset to be able to maybe add a layer of proportionality when we look at privacy. And I'll give you a perfect example. Data minimization, which is a foundational principle next to consent around, you consent to the data being collected, but then you minimize your data set. Well, we just talked about AI, LLMs requiring a vast amount of data, right, for it to be useful and accurate, right? So maybe the regulators have to start thinking about, proportionality tests around the data minimization principle. Otherwise, it's out the window. We don't have time to rewrite good law. It takes forever to write law and put it on the books. And by the time the law is enacted, it's bad law anyways, because technology is 10 steps ahead.
So talking about AI, obviously there's lots of changes happening. Privacy regulations are also going to evolve rapidly. Do you have any advice to offer up for global organizations that are trying to navigate these changes and be both competitive and compliant?
So we talked a little bit about taking a risk-based approach to compliance, given that there's a patchwork of laws around the world. I think standards are going to be very complementary to AI and privacy regulation, and taking a holistic approach to privacy protection, talking about controls and requirements and compliance obligations across 4 domains like people, process, governance, and technologies will be important. I also think that ethics needs to be in the mix because compliance doesn't ensure ethical behavior. And if you look at AI risk management and AI models and the risks associated with it, I think the market is going to expect trustworthy AI, responsible use of data. And that isn't really codified into law. So I think it's a cultural mindset. It's about having an all-inclusive discussion to guide organizational decisions and having committees, striking committees that are multidisciplinary in nature to have data scientists, lawyers, privacy and cybersecurity professionals coming together to talk about what we should or could do with the data. The law is going to say what you can or can't do. It's a baseline. But being ethical and responsible is around a code of ethics, right? Having a principled approach to responsible use of data. And I see it with really great companies like IBM and others where they launch responsibility principles and thinking about it from a consumer centric lens is going to be really, really critical to all of that, right? What would the consumer expect?
Switching gear a little bit, I'm curious if during your long career, you've worked with so many clients, you've been with so many different organizations, if there's a compelling moment or story that you could share with the audience.
So going back to that whole harmonization of, different jurisdictional legal obligations, being a lawyer by training and having ended up at a big four, I understood really quickly what a control was. As a former lawyer, I thought a control was a verb, not a noun. And then I started to work with the internal audit guys and I really understood what the generally accepted privacy principles were and how to test controls, right? Is a control in place? Is it effective? And, we had a company that had a business model based on, men having extramarital affairs with women. And that company got compromised. It was a high profile data breach that my firm at the time was involved in. And I had this assessment methodology leveraging privacy by design, which later became an ISO standard that I was the Canadian chair of. It was 31700. We didn't have a standard. We just had a methodology. And it was a really big success because I was overly confident in the controls that needed to be in place, that the regulators accepted the privacy by design assessment and certification as proof of compliance. And so that was a huge success story. And that's how I launched the privacy by design certification program. And we evolved the standard over 5 years. And we started looking for the future. And we already knew how to harmonize, guidance, laws, controls, best practices into one assessment methodology, which we call privacy by design. And today it's been quite successful. We got TELUS, a leading telco in Canada here, certified with their first AI chatbot over a month ago. So that is my proudest moment, I think. And the lesson there is, be confident. Be confident in your due diligence defense. The regulators do understand the client's business. It's the business and the organization that understands the parameters. And it's their job to prove accountability, to demonstrate it, right? And to document it. And so my best advice to anybody would be document, stress test. Don't just set it and forget it. Test the controls, monitor the controls, and have those really important data conversations.
For those who may not be familiar with privacy by design, can you give us a bottom line upfront summary of what is it? Why does it matter? What are the core tenets?
Yeah, it's more important than ever, especially with AI. Privacy by design and security by default is really a philosophy. It's a cultural mindset that teaches the business and the organization to treat privacy with importance, to think about it upfront rather than retrofit a system. So it's really about good engineering practice. And engineers love this because, think about a building that's being erected by engineers. They're going to think about all the safety issues, right? Think about a construction site, right? Do you wear a helmet and boots? Yes, you do, right? So when it comes to data, do you have default settings that let the customer control how much privacy they want or don't want? So really, it's about having the ability to proactively manage the privacy harm and the risk upfront, rather than let the breach or infraction or the violation happen, and then you're just managing the falling out of it. So it's really more of a philosophy than anything else. And in Canada, my former privacy boss, Dr. Anne Kabukian, she had the 7 principles of privacy by design, which is 7 principles about being proactive, not reactive, putting security and privacy on an equal footing, building in the default settings into the architecture, working with the engineers, taking multidisciplinary approach, and really coming at all of it with a user-centric focus, right? It's about user centricity. It's about the customer, respecting the customer choices. And that philosophy really got baked into the GDPR in 2018 as law. And now it's replicated in Law 25 in Quebec, here in Canada. So pretty proud.
And in terms of adoption, I'm curious, are you finding that most organizations are embracing it? They're ahead of the curve, or are we still lacking adoption for privacy by design?
I would say that I'm seeing it more than ever being put into practice. 20 years ago, when I started my career in privacy, we were looking at privacy as a legal compliance exercise where privacy was typically the job of a lawyer reporting into the general counsel. Then there was an interim stage where mature companies started to think about privacy by design, started treating privacy more of a risk management, exercise, and the privacy officers would be reporting into the CRO and the compliance department. And now, more than ever, privacy is about technology. It's about privacy enhancing technologies, right? It's about privacy enablement through technology, automation. We don't want to be working Excel anymore. And so I would say even the vendors are asking consultancies about what do we do to enable our customer to be privacy compliant, because the GDPR mandates that, but also because we don't want liability. So privacy by design has become super famous, I think, globally. It's been translated into more than 38 countries all over the world. So more than ever now with AI, I think with that privacy engineering mindset, with that multidisciplinary sort of approach and discipline that you have to look at it with, I think it's become super popular and more important.
In terms of technologies for the future of data privacy, which types of technologies do you see will have the most impact, perhaps in the next 6 to 12 months and maybe a little bit longer term?
Cloud computing. I think cloud computing is essential to AI. And also, I think we should be making the most advances through AI in medicine and healthcare. It's crazy to think that at a hospital for imaging and diagnostics, you're coming into the front office and still filling out paper-based forms. And there's still clients that are waiting, patients, called patients waiting for critical services, suffering and pain because the wait lists are so long. So AI enablement in medicine and science, I think, is going to be hugely important. And I think it should be fast tracked.
What's your number one advice for leaders right now that are looking to future proof their organizations when it comes to data privacy? And maybe if you think about a younger Sylvia, do you have any special advice for those that are starting out their career in data privacy?
So, data privacy is being transformed as a profession. The International Association of Privacy Professionals, which has about 85,000 individuals as members, is no longer even referring themselves to an association of privacy professionals. They're just called simply IAP. They discovered what I think the line partners like myself have known all of these years, that data is not just a privacy issue or a legal issue. It's a multidisciplinary complex issue that requires cybersecurity professionals alongside with it. And AI governance is super important because privacy security will need some sort of an umbrella, like data governance over it, right? So I think that it's super important for young privacy pros to start upskilling. There is AI governance training that's going to be critical to their career success. And also embedding security into their training so that they better understand how to work with these professionals. And if I could do it all over again, I would focus more on the technology side of privacy rather than just the policy side. There's a ton of lawyers doing the policy side and the program side of it. But right now, the sexy, fun thing to look at is privacy engineering. How can AI transform policies, procedures into projects that can be monitored and measured and used as proof of compliance? That's going to be the fun part. So that would be my advice. Have an open mind. Privacy is a dynamic, not a static operation. It's evolving. And there's a lot to learn today.
It's a very vast topic. We could probably talk about it all day. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow up with you, follow your career, what's the best place for them to go?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. A lot of the work we do at the Future of Privacy Forum is always posted on LinkedIn. Feel free to look up the Future of Privacy Forum online. We have a lot of internship programs and great thought leadership coming out. So that's the easiest way to reach me. And I hope you DM me if you have any questions or want to be part of thought leadership or scholarship. I'm happy to collaborate.
Fantastic. We could probably talk about it all day. It's been really fun and I've learned a lot. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks.